Hey, Prime members! Have you heard? You can listen to your favorite podcasts ad-free? Good news! With Amazon Music, you have access to the largest catalog of ad-free top podcasts included with your Prime membership. To start listening, download the Amazon Music app for free or go to amazon.com/ad-free-podcast. That's amazon.com/ad-free-podcast to catch up on the latest episodes without the ads.
We're not here to do everything. We're here to be part of the experience. And that doesn't only live in a physical place anymore, right? You have a virtual communication with people. People are holding something in their hand that's leading through it. So we want to own that entire experience.
Welcome to Barriers to Entry, a design innovation podcast on the Surround Podcast Network. This is the show where we obsess over the not too distant future of the architecture, design, and creative industries, and the ideas, tools, technologies, and the talent that will take us there. I'm Andrew Lane, co-founder at Digby, and with me, as always, my delightful co-host, the Chief Growth Officer at Sandow Design Group, Bobby Benet. Bobby, how you doing?
I'm doing well. Dog days of summer of BTE, Andrew. It's great to be back with you for another exciting episode today.
Yeah, absolutely. Rolling through season 2, the unofficial season of Sphere, which we continue to dip into, and we'll hear a little bit more about today. What have you been doing with your summer, Bobby?
Thinking a lot about the future of design and trying to come up with some bold predictions for the future of design. I'm going to withhold mine for now, but I'm wondering, Andrew, before we bring on today's guest, if you have anything that you're looking ahead at in your crystal ball as it relates to what's coming ahead for us in the world of design.
Well, I mean, the world of design is such a narrow topic, so I appreciate
I ask the hard questions.
Yeah, you keeping it lean for me. But I think that per our podcast and per what we do at Digby, I'm really interested to see the normalization of all of the technology that we're seeing floating around us right now. We're seeing a lot of experimentation. We're seeing a lot of people using AI for methods that people see as really positive or see as detrimental potentially to the practice of design. But I think that this is the early stage that we're in. And I think that in the future, we're really going to see this technology start to benefit the true practice and deliver what we're intending for it to deliver, which is to allow designers to be humans and to be creatives and to do great creative things. So that's my blanket broad answer to your blanket broad question.
Good job.
As always, I'm very glass half full on these things, Bobby. And I think we have another design optimist joining us today. Do we not?
Yeah, I appreciate your optimism. I'm glad you're the one who got that question. And we're going to get into a whole lot of future casting with today's guest. Lionel Ohayon has spent the last 20 years of his career designing nightclubs, restaurants, and event venues. Recently and notably, Lionel was the interior designer behind the amazing Sphere Entertainment venue in Las Vegas, which our listeners know is a podcast favorite. His renowned firm, ICRAVE, is at the forefront of creating visceral connections between audiences and artists that blend the physical world with the digital world. Lionel is also Chief Creative Officer and co-founder at Journey, a global innovation and design studio that pioneers groundbreaking next-gen customer experiences. And we're going to tackle the future of design, what makes for a truly immersive design experience, and a whole lot more today, if you can't tell. Thanks for joining us, Lionel.
Thanks for having me, guys. That's quite an intro.
Mouthful, but I made my way through it. And we want to start by spending just a minute or two, Lionel, on your career. And I'm curious, as you zoom out, how do you look at the way in which design has evolved over the last 20 years that you've been doing this? And Andrew called you an optimist in the intro. Would you view yourself, as you look at design and you look at the last 20 years, as a pessimist or an optimist?
No, I think I'm an optimist. I think that there's a fair dose of pessimism that fuels my optimism, and we could talk about that. But I think that ultimately, it's like the arc of the future bends towards things that are better for mankind, right? Mm-hmm. And so we have a choice, right? It's kind of a binary choice. Are we going to use this for good, or are we going to use this for bad? Now that, depending on what industry you're talking about, means all sorts of different things. And, I came at this kind of moment, this most recent moment with the realization that AI was going to me, what came to mind was AI was going to eviscerate my business, right? And that I had been thinking about, well, we'll talk about it, but we've been thinking about technology and design my whole career. But when I started to understand what AI had the potential of being, and it was not when we started talking about AI, it's when I understood what Pinterest was trying to be, right? When I just was like, oh, wow, this is like a highway to a whole different way of getting to like design solutions, and then start to understand the kind of overlays and what the power of that could be. And I still think that the entire middle of the profession of design, what I mean is the design that's not evolutionary, or it's not innovative, it's not trying to reach beyond what's not known yet. That whole world of design is going to collapse to the middle because of things like AI. And so the question is, how do we use AI as a tool, as opposed to being, and it's nothing I'm sure you haven't heard. How do we use AI as a tool to make design more efficient, better, more human, right? And in doing that, you got to figure out, what is it not going to do for us? And I think that's the scariest part. It really is the scariest part, is like, what is it not going to do for us? Because it certainly can make a whole lot of people lazy.
When you first, had that thought that AI was going to eviscerate design as we knew it, and maybe, the role that firms and designers play in design, you run a firm, you're chief creative officer at Journey, which you might not have been in that role yet as you were starting to think about the role artificial intelligence would play. How did you manage, the folks who worked for you in terms of communicating with them about the role AI would play? Did you have to kind of sit back for a moment and digest how are we going to spin AI in a way that we can leverage it? Or were you just were you doing damage control? Like, how did you kind of internalize that feeling as you were figuring out how to maybe make lemonade out of lemons from an AI standpoint?
So let's back up to, pre-AI as we know it, mid-Journey, and think about, we would say, we would not allow people to make mood boards out of Pinterest, right?
Right.
And clients know how to make mood boards out of Pinterest. And so early idea gen made out of like a repository of images that you can search by putting in keywords, it's a public forum for everyone to go to the same well and pull out the same ideas. And so we had clients, who would remark that you're the first client, you're the first firm that we've met with in a long time that's not just showing us images that we pulled together ourselves. Mm-hmm. Or conversely, someone's like, what is this? And we sort of searched through it and realized that someone in the studio just pulled everything up from, and everything sort of like is this race to the middle, right? Everything turned kind of like dusty rose and, this kind of like mint green. The whole world had these kind of like basic arches and spheres and, little balls. And it was very kind of like cartoony. And I think like that was kind of a reaction to everything being kind of like morphed into the same singular idea, right? The more people who picked that image, obviously, the more that it came forward, and then more people saw it as like, and trending was happening based on that kind of selection. And so it's like, well, what's the value of paying a firm? And we saw it in real time. What's the value of paying a firm, right, if you could just go figure it out yourself? Mm. And when I say, wow, AI is going to eviscerate our business, it kind of went like this. Okay, there's trillions of images that are tagged, right? Soon they'll be shoppable, right? The idea that you could just punch a plan into, put a plan through a photocopier, upload it or whatever, and then say, bohemian chic, mid-century modern, Tulum cool, right? And a gazillion ideas come forward. You form that into 3 boards and you go, here, I have 3 solutions for you. By the way, everything on every one of these images, you can click and shop, and we can Amazon logistics this thing to your house and figure out how much it's going to cost, right? So I was like, this is happening in real time, and that's where it's going. And that we'll talk about Journey, but that's really when Journey was born, right? For me, it was like, I have to evolve. Like, to me, it was like an evolve or die moment. And as much as we were kind of like always integrating design through the digital experience and the physical experience, the process of how design was done was not something that we were really innovating on. We weren't really thinking about, well, how do you deliver in today's age? Like, what does a scope of work look like? Right? And what do you deliver and what don't you deliver? And when I talk about the middle being, there's literally trillions of hotel rooms around the world. I mean, images of hotel rooms that are uploaded into image banks. Mm-hmm. And if the value proposition of your hotel is that you want to have a nice looking hotel, right? That it's a value proposition, right? It's $175 a night, looks cool, blah, blah, blah. You really, today, there's a strong argument to be made that you don't need to hire a design firm to do it, right? You just don't like, and I think that that's like a good example of trying to understand the why. Why are we doing what we do, and what does a deliverable actually look like, right? Because a lot of the stuff that we've been doing traditionally is solvable, and if you think about it from large buildings, I mean, if you're building a skyscraper and you imagine what AI can do to set the foundation, what type of foundation do you need based on where you are, right? What's your strategy for elevators and staircases? You know, curtain wall, what kind of curtain? You can get to way past that early planning and into concept and beyond concept to schematic very, very quickly.
It's really interesting when you describe the way that the aesthetic kind of moved to that sort of cartoony, everything had bubbles, like, you know, at that sort of early stage of Midjourney. It really reminds me of what Instagram kind of did to photography a decade beforehand. And, you know, I've heard this described by other guests and panels I've been on and whatnot as edit culture, this idea that we now have this ability to kind of rapidly mash up and iterate on everything. And that starts to create a bit of a homogenous look in some areas in the middle, as you called it. So I wanted to jump into the relationship between ICRAVE and Journey. And maybe you can talk a little bit about, you know, how the two are a little different and what the purpose was in creating Journey with this mission focused on, I believe the term is next gen customer experience. I'm
smiling because Journey's new to us and we continue to challenge how we describe and what we talk about. And I had been trying to understand what ICRAVE is and what ICRAVE ultimately would become. I ran ICRAVE. We started it in 2002, I think, or the end of 2001. And, you know, we've done a lot. We've spent a lot of time innovating and trying to like push ideas, and a real incredible, for a relatively small studio, incredible amount of different types of work, whether it's healthcare, nightclubs, airports, urban planning, event-based kind of experience, immersive work. Like for a small firm to be working across all these different disciplines was really, I think when I step back and look at it, it's an incredibly prolific body of work that constantly asked itself to challenge, right? And so for me, I was kind of getting to the point with iCrave where I was like, well, what is the next thing? You know, what was the next challenge? And that's separate. I'd learned after all that time that iCrave was no longer just Lionel's ideas, right? It had become a real company. There's other people, and it was great. There's all these different people. We've always had a mashup, best idea wins. So where do we go from one thing to the next? And I think that the evolution of design for us was in all of that innovative idea gen. Like a lot of our ideas we couldn't deliver on. We said, we have a great idea. You're going to use this technology, or we should find a way to invent a technology that does A, B, or C. Or in a hospital, for example, if we put a RTLS device on a patient, right, which is a RFID tag, so it means real-time location service, you can find out where the patient is. If you do that, everyone's anxiety goes down because people are, where's my wife? Is she out of surgery? What's going on? Looking for doctors. It's just like it changes the whole game of how a hospital operates if everybody's anxiety goes down, by half, right? So we're like thinking about that stuff. And then we come up with a big idea, but we can't deliver on that because we haven't built a studio that's got the technological, prowess inside of it. Or we want to do this immersive thing with projection mapping or RFID or whatever it might be. So it was like, look, we're disingenuous about what we think a design firm is today. The design firm is, people were like, are you guys interiors? Are you guys experience designers? We're like, hey, you know what? We don't really know what we are. We're kind of like a fish dog, you know what I mean? We're kind of doing a little bit of both, and we couldn't really put ourselves in a box. And so I kind of was like, we're kind of like, look, it's our clients would be, we always spend like the first 5 minutes explaining who we are, explaining what it is about iCrave, which is frustrating, right? You want to just be like, call us for this, or people call this when they want to do the interior design of a building that's already built. And then we are like, hey, if you moved this and did this and entered from this side, and they just shake their head and go, why didn't I call you 2 years ago? That might have been the start of it, where I was driving home from a job back to New York. It was a 2-hour drive. And I was like, I know why he didn't call me 2 years ago. I never told him, call me 2 years ago, where I let the industry define us mostly into interiors and lighting. So we were like, well, what would a company look like today? right? If you started, like, I don't want to be disingenuous about it. Like, it's not like, hey, iCrave now does digital twinning and we got all this content production, right? And so I had been working with a gentleman named Andy Zimmerman, who was a former CEO of Frog. And he came on and he called me. We've been trying to get something done for years, and we're trying to figure out how to like leverage the design process to have more ownership in projects, so you can be part of like the equity part of the upside instead of just a fee-based business, so that all designers can get paid more money and all this stuff. And we've been bouncing around for a long time, maybe 5, 6, 7 years. Like, how are we going to start this new thing? And he called me one day. He's like, let's do this. We got to do this. And I was like, all right, I'm in. Let's go. And I was like, both of us kind of landed on this idea, like next gen customer experience is about what does it mean to be a design firm today? What do you have to include in your solutions, right? Because if you come up with ideas and you come up with solutions and then you can't execute on them, you're just making the problem more complex. And so that's really what Journey really is looking to do. And we really landed on this idea of like multi-dimensional design, right? Like, we're designing physical, virtual, immersive, right? Those are kind of like digital. Like, it's like they're all part of a design service. And we see like clients now, even as we're learning how to describe it and talk about it, literally kind of like breathe out and go, my God, thank you. Because it's, you're getting, you start working on a set of drawings, and then you add, the architects and the engineers, and then the interiors, and then the lighting, and then the digital, and then the interface, they just become enormous sets of drawings. And it's because everyone's sort of tacking on, and it becomes super complex, and it's not working the way it is. So for me, really is like, can we reinvent the way design is done today? What does that look like? And how does it stay within the experience kind of brackets, right? Like, inside of like, we're not here to do everything. We're here to sort of be part of the experience. And that doesn't only live, as you guys know, your project doesn't only live in a physical place anymore, right? You have a virtual communication with people. People are holding something in their hand that's leading them through it. So we want to own that entire experience.
How is it that you guys think about the symbiosis between like what was iCrave and what is Journey? And like you mentioned, a lot of different disciplines there. How have you had to think about the people who you bring into the firm, and what talent looks like as well?
It's a great question, and it's something we think about every day. But ultimately, I think iCrave's hidden strength was strategy, right? It was this ability to do strategy work in a different way, to help our clients solve for their why without them understanding what that might be, and get to that really early. So that strategy, that the ability to kind of like think through a problem, and our mantra is thought to think, right? We're pre-concept and strategy through the build, while it's getting built, and then helping during the programming. Like, programming is a big part of what we do. Like, what does a calendar look like in this place that you guys built for us? How do we use it during the day? How does it transform on Saturday night? So there's these different kind of buckets of skill sets that are coming into play. And what we're learning is that we've been doing digital twinning for a long time. Most architects have. It's virtual renderings and 3D walkthroughs and whatnot. But supercharging that and turning it on its ear and really understanding how digital twinning can become the spine or the backbone around which everything that we do, from pre-concept through operations and marketing and everything, is kind of like where we're starting to find the voice of what the true opportunity is here for Journey. So back to your question about who are we bringing on, we've delivered a full virtual metaverse type experience for Walmart, right? Where millions and millions of people watched a live concert on Roblox, right? And that's like a whole different kind of engineer, but still inside the creative experience mind, right? Gaming designers, right? And then we're working in Unreal, and we're working in Unreal now through iCrave projects, right? So we're starting to see this convergence of like these deliverables that are all working across a pipeline that's really engaging through these different types of mediums that I would call that are all part of the experience cycle. So for example, I'll give you an example. We just delivered in Qiddiya in Saudi Arabia through Journey, a hyper real movie of a racetrack that's going to be built in Qiddiya. I'm not sure if you've ever seen it, but if not, we'll forward it to you afterwards.
Put it in the show notes.
Yeah, it's super hyper real, and it's like we own the digital twin of Qiddiya. And so now if they want to, we did that work for them. So we own the kind of carcass of it. And so if they want to do an experience on it and they want it to be hyper real, we can deliver that to them, right? So a part of a city is now built, and we can actually say, okay, well, what will it actually be like? What is it like during the day, at night? What's the view from this hotel? Maybe the hotel wants to turn 30 degrees, right? And then aside from that, you can use that twin to do traffic analysis, which is not a beautiful looking thing, but it's like, well, what happens when 50,000 people pour in? How do they get out of here? How's it going to work? And so, and that's the same model that we can do our early concept design work on, right? And we could start doing design work across it so that we're sort of like understanding how that pipeline all ties together. So we're finding people that are coming from movie. We're finding people who are coming from gaming, obviously architects and engineers. We're finding anthropologists in our work. A lot of really disparate kind of connectivity. That's pretty exciting. The more that we find people from different disciplines, the more the work gets kind of rich.
As you're working on some of these projects, Lionel, you mentioned Walmart and Roblox. You've referenced digital twins a few times. Over the time we've just been producing this podcast, we've navigated a number of hype cycles as relates to the technologies that have been employed in our industry or writ large from a like Web3 or metaverse standpoint. And so what's your vantage point as it relates to technologies that might be in vogue for a moment, then might be gimmicky the next moment? It sounds like you have, obviously an experimental mindset. You mentioned with the virtual city, understand like the tactical nature of traffic analysis is just as important as, executing on a virtual raceway. So are there things you don't touch, or you're like, I want to dig in here and figure out how this technology might turn into something that's really, really valuable for my clients?
I'm very, very bullish on this idea of, let's call metaverse immersive web, right? Mm-hmm. There's no question to me that I don't think anybody who's been close to it, that web was text-based, then there were images, then it became, then it became e-commerce, and then it became video, whatever the steps were that got it to where it is, Web 2.0, you want to call it today. This idea that we're going immersive into web is absolutely happening, and it's going to happen at scale, right? You're going to have a much more, immersive opportunity to experience things you want to do. We're seeing with voice command, you can imagine having an experience with an AI device and, shopping, or whether that's with a mask on, a headset on, or whether that's just looking at a screen or just talking, with a device and speaking back and forth. A lot of what we're seeing is this opportunity to engage directly and get real-time answers, right? And so that immersive web piece is a very, very important part. The reason why it goes through hype cycles is because the bankers are expecting the quarter-to-quarter results, and when they don't get it, they just throw the paper up in the air and go, we'll see in 5 years. But the direction of where it's going for me is absolutely clear. And for example, we're working on projects right now where we're building TSX, for example. You guys seen TSX in Times Square? Post Malone played there and all that. So we've got this whole ecosystem of cool stuff happening physically in Times Square. The stage opens up. Shakira comes out to 30,000 people, plays a 15-minute set. And then the building and the billboard turn into a promotional device for swag and her new album or whatever. That's the guy that's the head of music for Spotify who dreamed this thing up in the physical world and saw the value of the physicality of it. But there's a digital twin that's being built of Times Square so that 100 million people can tune in, right? And while they tune in, they can pull out a token, right? Put it into their digital wallet, and then come to TSX one day when they're in New York and redeem it for a physical object, right? So there's already connectivity between these things that's happening that people are thinking about. And so I really think that, audiences are getting so big. And I think Britney Spears' tour is evidence of that. She's going to tour for 3 years, and she might see 10% of her fans live, right? Because her fan base is just so enormous. So there's a question, well, what fills a gap between I'm a fan and I can afford it and go see it physically in a full show, or I can't at all. I never got to see my idol. And the answer is like these kind of TSX projects, a bunch of projects that we're looking at and thinking about where there's something in between, right, that exists. And a lot of that's going to fall on these social environments that are virtual, right? And when they're social and immersive, when the three of us can go into some world. And I think one of the things that people always get confused about twinning is like, it doesn't mean that it's a virtual twin. It's an exact replication of the real world, right? It's some experience that is analogous or on brand with whatever it is that you're going to experience. That doesn't. I think the less it is hyper real, the better it is. As a matter of fact, I think the fact that you don't have to deal with real world things because you're in a virtual world, you should play with things like gravity and where you are and whatnot.
I'm sure the artists of today appreciate that they won't have to replicate the Rolling Stones model and just tour into their 80s.
It's funny you say that. In 1997, I just come to New York and someone gave me some Rolling Stones tickets, and I was like, well, I better go see them. This
might be the last time
they're gonna play.
Yeah, I had the same experience in 2002. So we talked a lot about technology. I actually love how you talked about the virtual twin as kind of a spine or a backbone to this, because it certainly has that really intriguing potential and that really versatile functionality. But what are some of the other technologies that the team is looking at? What are some of the things that are kind of on your radar as places to explore as you continue to look at what the customer experience evolves into?
So in general, right now, Unreal as an engine for us exploring how we do our work and how we express our work, and how we sort of our work is generally in the experiential side or the emotive side of architecture, right? If you look at the kind of projects we do, they're big. They're places that people leave with delight, or it's a concert or a nightclub or like the Sphere. So we're kind of always in this kind of world where we're trying to figure out how will people react, right? Hospitals even, like, what is the takeaway? How do we make people more inspired? So using a medium or a platform that allows us to think through that by being able to manipulate what we call the experience of place, right, is really, really important to us. So right now, in the studio right now, learning how to use Unreal in ways that we haven't thought about it before is a really important piece of the puzzle. Like, how do we not blow up our ability to get work because everything got so expensive because we're trying new things, and still do the work at a level that we want to deliver it at. So there's that. The second is the idea of how technology becomes invisible. I show up at a hotel, right? The hotel knows I've arrived, right? I've already paid for my room. They figure out how I get upstairs and get into my room. These are things you're seeing already, right?
Well, if you have like Nexus or Global Entry, the new visual scanners are pretty close to that at this point, where you walk past a little kiosk for 4 seconds and they know who you are and they push you through. Like, it's there.
Yeah, it's there. And so, and then, we're working on a big project I can't really talk about, but it's like, well, I want people to be able to shop in a world where we know we've scanned their body somehow, and they don't need to try it on, right? Because they've scanned it. If they want, we'll send it, and we'll deliver it directly to their hotel room or all the way back to their house where they live and whatnot. So this kind of like connected world where, what does that do for, we're, like I said, we're trying to figure out experience of place, and we're trying to understand how do we, if you think about retail, if you can get rid of the inventory out of the equation, right? What does that mean for the kind of stores you could build? Right now, as we've grown up, you just have inventory of stuff in the store. You fill it up and you've got a store. If you don't need all that inventory because you've solved for it digitally or with some technology that understands you, and we're kind of there, like you said, most people have a pretty good idea of what size they are or whatnot. So you hold inventory enough for people to try things on, but not necessarily more than that, right? That changes the ability as a designer to think about what a retail store experience could be. How do you define a brand through four walls in a mall if you're not doing it by just putting mannequins and racks of clothes, right? And so those are the kind of like, that's the example of like the type of stuff that we're thinking about, whether that's in airports, right? Or along the travel or experience sort of band. That's kind of like where a lot of the technology, we're meeting with a lot of people who are doing a lot of like RFID tracking in retail, in airports and whatnot to sort of integrate that thinking into our work.
As you're looking at the design experience, Lionel, and you're rolling out some of those technologies or experimenting with them, I'm wondering how you contend with this idea of designing in a way that will stand the test of time. We spoke with Kelly Knapp, who was one of the creative directors who worked on Sphere. And right now, obviously, you encounter Sphere from the exterior, from the interior, you're completely blown away. But then just around the corner, you've got the Mirage, which was only built 34 years ago, and it's basically going to be, demolished or repurposed. And so when you're working on a project like that, I'm sure there's something in the back of your mind, which is, I want to make sure that the experience is as impactful today as it will be, or 20 years from now as it will be today. So when you're working on the cutting edge, I imagine that's more difficult than somebody who's, in that middle 80% that you chunked out in the beginning of our interview.
Yeah, I think that's a very hard question to answer because exactly for the reason you said, right? Like we're already, obviously people are asking what's next, what comes after the Sphere, right? What's the next immersive experience?
It's a very hard-hitting podcast, Lionel. Bobby's basically the male Barbara Walters.
Yeah, I'm feeling that. I'm ready to cry.
Bobby Walters.
It's kind of like there's two things that I always think about. You can't solve for everything, right? If you solve for everything, you kind of get nowhere. And Jim Dolan really had the vision to build this thing, right? And I don't know how many people you'll talk to about MSG Sphere, but I assure you that this was pure sheer determination and his imagination that brought this thing to fruition, right? And had he thought, well, if I hedge and, what if we only have 2,000 people and we should have a way to make it smaller because that way we'll be able to, you know what I mean? We'll get more days out of it and all this bullshit. It wouldn't have had that kind of like singular, incredible kind of impact, right? And for me, like that's the power of this thing, right? Whether it is the catalyst for the future of entertainment to change forever, which I believe it is. I believe it changes the game, or it is the thing that lasts forever. I don't think it's materially important. Right. I think what's important, and especially in this one where really it's about the utilization of that screen. Since from U2 to Fish, you saw a produced content which cost tens of millions of dollars to produce, right? Which was the big hanging question mark, which was like, well, if it's going to cost you $20 million for 40 shows, how are you going to make this product viable? By the time we got to Fish, who made 4 shows viable and profitable, right? They were able to like literally put content on a mixing board, right? And in real time have artists mixing different content together so that it was live, generative, so it wasn't rendered, right? It wasn't like you sat down like you do in the production of a movie and get an idea rendered from beginning to end, which is what U2 show was, right? They were rendering amazing images. It was incredible. Here, they're just like, well, 4 shows, we got a mixing board, let's go play while they do the show. And people were blown away because they just kept putting new stuff and adding new things. It's literally like live content. Yeah. And so it's just open. And that's happened just in these few months. Imagine what's going to happen as people continue to overlay opportunity on what that thing can do. So I think that in some ways, I think when people marry themselves to too much technology, they for sure make themselves obsolete. In one fashion or another, they're going to have to add things, take things away, replace things, right? So it's just like this constant, and that's just where we are in the evolution of like technology and design right now. You got to try things, you got to break some eggs to try new things and figure it out. But in terms of like the more prescient part of that question is, what I talk about, what are the emotive response people have to placemaking, right? What is the arc of arriving in a place? And if you study architecture in architecture school, you'd study like the Paris Opera House, and this idea of like coming into that foyer and the seeing and being seen and the pageantry, and then going into the actual opera house itself, and like understanding like how people are, what is the experience of going to a place. And that, to me, the part that we really worked on was like, well, this could just be an arena, right? And we could just make it like every arena. You spend as little money as possible. You put some food outlets because it's all about the football game or the hockey game. It's fluorescent lighting and facilities management. But here it was like really an attempt to really make it, when you enter the sphere, you step through the looking glass, and you've completely arrived in another world, right? We've suspended reality with like trying to erase this kind of horizon by this kind of fully reflective floor, and use a really dynamic lighting program so that people arrive in a place and feel like there is placemaking there and events themselves happen in that area. For the viability of this as a project ongoing, you got to think of the sphere with a bowl in it cut out of the sphere leaves this big, huge area for public space, right? And if you go in, and I hope you guys get a chance to go if you haven't been yet.
Oh, yeah.
We went, yeah.
Did you go?
Yeah, we went on a date together, actually. Yeah.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah.
So you see the vastness of all that area there. Mm-hmm. And that area might be we don't know yet, but we know that it's getting rented a lot and it's being used a lot. It's convention space, it's meeting space, it's showroom space, right? It's show space, it's performing arts space. It's all sorts of things that are happening in there. Forget the bowl, right? Just that is a project. And I think you got to think about things that way right now. Like you really, like we want that place to be like multidimensional in so much as people use it for different times. And we made very high-end food outlets with real restaurants that are right behind that wall that are cooking food fresh for you. There's bars, there's all sorts of cool areas out there. So our intent was really to sort of, present an answer for an experience of, not just being in the bowl, but actually what a day or a night might look like.
Love that perspective. So Lionel, one thing we do in every episode is give a chance to plug, and I'll turn it over to Bobby because he's our plug guy. But I did have to note, Bobby, as much as it's the season of Sphere, it also might be the season of NDA because I know there's some crazy stuff that Lionel's working on. But take it away with the plugs, Bobby.
Yeah, we'd love to hear, Lionel, what you referenced a couple of projects that have just wrapped up. We could probably spend an entire episode on TSX Broadway, for example. But what are you and ICRAVE and Journey up to, or what's coming to life right now that you can talk about with us?
You're right. It's like such an NDA thing. I'm just like, I think what's most exciting for us right now is, a lot of our projects have been like, this is an ICRAVE project at Journey. This is a Squint Opera project at Journey, right? And what we're finally seeing, and we knew it was going to take some time, is like, this is a Journey project, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm like, if ICRAVE were on it, this is what we would do. But because we're now Journey, here are all the kind of facets of the experience that we're able to tackle. The ones in the Kingdom and in UAE are all super, they're incredible. They're next level. You know them. I can't really speak about what we're working on them, but they're all I'm going to tell you a few things that's really interesting about what's happening over there. You have a dynamic where a client's asking you to completely be in the next. Like if they've seen it, heard it, if it's something that's been done before, it has no value to them. Mm-hmm. Right? They're looking for you to break eggs and do something new. Mm-hmm. And in doing that, they've created this situation for themselves where they've had to think through the process of like, how do you get things done? Like, what's the order of operations? What do you need first? What do you need second? We are still drawing the way, quite frankly, Vitruvius would make drawings in like whatever it was, 2nd century AD, right? Yeah. Like you draw, you make a plan, you cut a section, you have a 3D object, and you make it flat, then you go build it again in 3D, and then like, well, why are we doing that, right? And there, like a lot of times you're seeing a digital ask before a physical ask, right? Because they're just building in the sand, right? They're just like, okay, well, first I want a whole expression of what this thing might be digitally, then physically, then what's the digital layer that goes, And so what we're learning from that is, and what I believe is going to happen, I could be wrong, but I believe what's going to happen is this new process is going to present itself all over the world, right? Because they've invested such an amount of money. They've got case studies. Every consultant in the world, BCG, McKinsey, KPMG, they're all there, right? And they're all sort of working on solving all this thing. And so there's a new process unfolding that is going to fundamentally change the way projects are asked for. And until clients ask for it a different way, you could do all the innovation in the world thinking that you've got some new way to do things, but it doesn't matter because the RFP is always going to come to you in the old way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So as a final question we always ask, if someone out there is really interested in this cross-functional, immersive, always evolving work that you're doing, is there any resources that you would share or any advice that you would give to someone who's really looking to build that innovation muscle and just explore how to move themselves forward in this area?
It's a good question. There are some amazing companies out there. I'll plug Moment Factory, who do extraordinary work. You guys should meet with them. They're good friends of ours and collaborators. We're learning a lot from our partners at Squint Opera, their process versus our process. This is what I think in general.
I can't believe we didn't even talk about Squint Opera on this. That's another really cool company in your portfolio. Yeah.
Yeah, they do epic work. And I think I think that what I would tell people is to do the technology part, the part about delivering, like, do you know how to use Unreal, is much, much less important than do you know how to understand space, place, delight, how to create an experience. Like, how do you create an experience? And I don't think a lot of people understand that, right? Like, do you know how to throw a dinner party? Right? What are the essential parts to inviting people to your home and actually delivering on a dinner party, right? And I think these kind of how do you do that? How do you actually make an experience for people, right? And what are the inputs that you got to think about? Did you think about the lighting? Did you think about the music, right? Did you think about where they would arrive and where are they kicking their shoes off and how's it like? Do you need flowers? Do you not? Like, the theater of that, I think, is an essential piece for people to be able. And I had a kid come in one day and said, "These are the dinner parties I throw," and I was like, both hands up in the air. I was like, "Yes," because I just want to know, I want to know that you have a personal point of view on what your outcome expectation is. And the problem with AI right now is that it's the tail wagging the dog kind of thing. It's like, it's so easy to just put in some nonlinear things and come up with something and go, oh, wow, look at that. That's amazing. That's so cool. But at the end of the day, it's about understanding this kind of what I always speak about, like this pointy end of the pencil is the experience that people come out with. How did they feel? And do you understand what you're doing to manipulate? I use the word manipulate, not in a bad way, but to manipulate the experience. Like, I want people to feel safe, or I want them to be anxious to the point that they make a decision, because once they make a decision, they're engaged because they're not passively viewing. They've actually decided to go left or right, or that they're going to go up a stair or through a hole or whatever that might be, right? And so this idea of what does it take to get people through an arc of a night is really, really important. And I'm always trying to find ways to hear people tell me what they know about that, because the technologies and all the layers that we have to put it all together is secondary to understanding those parts.
Love that take. Love it. Lionel, thanks so much for joining us today. It was a great conversation. Even the stuff that's under NDA was kind of cool to hear the nibbles of, but obviously you guys have a ton going on in the portfolio of companies, and it was great to just get your perspectives across all this. Did you learn anything about the future of design, Bobby? Do you have any predictions now that you've heard all this?
No predictions, but glad to hear the original conceit of the podcast 2.5 years ago, which was to talk all about the metaverse, is still relevant today, 2.5 years ago.
Definitely. It's definitely relevant. And the other thing I want to say is let's touch base again soon. We have some announcements to make coming up, and maybe another year we'll have another touch base and hear about some cool stuff.
We would love that. Bobby, do you want to read us out?
Yeah, as always, we'd like to extend a big thank you to the Barriers to Entry production team, our producer Rob Schulte, and everyone else back at the studio by Sandow Podcave. Barriers to Entry is part of the Surround Podcast Network. Make sure you go to surroundpodcasts.com. That's podcasts with an S. Smash the follow button and join us next time as we continue to break down the barriers to entry.
We didn't get any of that stuff recorded before, did we?
About cubes and spheres?
Yeah. We should ask Lionel. We were trying to understand, like, is a cube or a sphere, because they're in 3D, are they just considered shapes, or is there another, like, more advanced terminology for things when they become three-dimensional?
I think a sphere is that's what describes a circle in 3 dimensions, right?
Yeah, okay. We didn't know if there was like another word.
I can't believe that stayed on your mind the entire show, Andrew.